This is Paul McGuire, and we're giving you a prophetic update. I was just talking with you in the last session about the spiritual root of our problems, and it's worth repeating. Again, behind all the economic problems, which are real, the offshore manufacturing of corporations that have left the U.S. through overregulation, the excessive regulatory environment, which is putting the brakes on business growth. We could go on and on and on. The manipulation of our financial markets by the Federal Reserve, because there's a deliberate and intentional plan to bring America down in order to create a one world currency. And the only way you can make that happen, and this has been planned for over 100 years by the Fabian Socialists. I go into it in great detail in my 3 DVD series called Are You Ready for the Coming One World Government? Are You Ready for the Coming One World Economic System? And Are You Ready for the Coming One World Religion? This has been planned for a long time. Global government. So the game plan is this: devalue the dollar, the attack is deliberately being made on the middle class. Make no mistake about it. The American middle class is in the bullseye of this thing. It's not an accident that the American middle class and the European middle class is getting hit hard. You are the intended target. It's not random, and it's not an accident. You're the intended target. Transfer the wealth. Soros openly said this on the BBC. Transfer the wealth of the middle class out of the United States into third world nations where it ends up, he didn't say this part, where it ends up in the hands of dictators. Transfer the wealth of the European middle class to third world nations. And so you create two classes in the United States of America and the rest of the world. The elite, or what H.G. Wells used to refer to arrogantly as the scientific elite, which he wrote in his book in the early 1900s called The New World Order. And he said there'd be two classes, the workers or the slaves and the elite. And that's what you're seeing in most nations around the world, including America. You're seeing the deliberate disappearance of the middle class, the deliberate destruction of home ownership and the capacity for the middle class to save money and pass wealth on to their children. This is a deliberate attack. And by the way, this was formulated first in the Illuminati Manifesto. And if you doubt me, read it. And if you can't find it, get my DVD series and you can read it up on the screen. The Illuminati, approximately 100 years earlier than the Communist Manifesto, laid out a game plan for a global revolution which called for the destruction of the middle class. The Communist Manifesto is a mirror of the Illuminati Manifesto, point by point, and it calls for the destruction of the middle class. Now, they don't call it destruction, they call it wealth redistribution. But I don't think you can build a very strong case for a nation that's embraced that economic system and say, gee, that's a place I'd like to live. Can you? So, there's a spiritual root here. Let's be honest. For many, many decades, we've never been a perfect country, but for many decades, America has turned its back on God. And there is a remnant of Bible-believing Christians, but America has turned its back on God. There's flagrant immorality. There's idolatry of every kind. The society looks to government, not God, to be their source. And we see the collapse of our economy. But the root is we're ignoring the spiritual principle that it is God that gives you the power to get wealth. And because of our collectively not being in a right relationship with God, we become materialistic, sensualistic, self-centered. We say we worship God, but in reality, we worship the idols or the false gods of personal peace and prosperity. And that's the flat-out truth. And until we're willing to deal with that and repent of that sin, we're not going to receive the supernatural blessing of God in our nation that we so desperately need for economic recovery. Because we're in this very deep. We're on the Titanic and it's sinking. And unless God rescues us, we're going down. That's sober, I'm sorry, but there is a solution to it. And it's called crying out to God. Something that our ancestors knew about. Crying out to God. So let's review some more financial facts. Why are we in an economic crisis? Again, this was planned by the globalists and the international bankers behind the Federal Reserve. One of the biggest blocks to our economic growth and prosperity is that we have crippled job creation. We have burdened small businesses and corporations with endless regulations and taxes. We have made it just about impossible for them to compete in a global marketplace with all our regulations and taxes, so that there's a mass exodus, and there has been for decades, a mass exodus of American companies fleeing America to locate their corporate headquarters in places like Ireland. Now, in addition, there's a secret, and I want to tell you about this secret. You're not going to hear about it in the so-called media that you're probably watching. They never talk about it because they don't tell you the full truth. And the reason they don't tell you the full truth is because they are in the pocket of the international bankers. So let's explain the scenario, and then you'll be able to understand why our job growth is crippled. We have, I don't know what the numerical count is, hundreds, thousands, probably thousands, of multinational corporations that are run basically by Americans, but they've relocated their corporate headquarters to places like the Cayman Islands where they don't have to pay any taxes. Now, these men, and this is called sin, these men are so self-centered and so evil, yeah, that's exactly what they are, that in their lust for money, because money is their god, it's a spiritual problem, in their lust for money, they are willing to watch the U.S. economy collapse into a new Great Depression because they refuse to pay legitimate taxes. Now, here's a figure that's been concealed from you by the media. They owe, legitimately, the U.S. government about $2.1 trillion in taxes. And if they would pay even a percentage of that, that would be an economic stimulus, that would fire up our economy, and we could have economic growth. But out of pure selfishness, now you can say this is capitalism. No, it isn't. It's selfishness. Out of pure selfishness, they choose to locate in islands and they pay nothing into the nation where they sell and make enormous profits because they're corrupt. And that corruption spreads throughout American society. Now, you'll never hear this. They control our politicians, by the way. That's why you never hear about it. They own our politicians. And our government came to them and said, look, we'll let you go. I think the tax rate for a corporation in the United States of America that's headquartered in the United States of America is 35%, which is too much. That's why we have an exodus of corporations fleeing the U.S. because they can't make profits. They can't compete in the global marketplace paying 35%, when they can go to Ireland and 1,000 other nations and pay next to nothing. It's also why they pick up and move from state to state. They go from the business unfriendly states to the friendly states. That's why businesses are fleeing California and New York, because they're hostile to business. But that's why California could go into default, and it may not be able to pay its pensions. And the same thing with New York. Do you know how quickly they could make our economic engines roar? All they would have to do is lay out the red carpet for corporations, substantially reduce the tax rate, substantially reduce the regulations, and corporations and businesses would flood into California and New York and other states, Michigan, and there would be a booming economy which would generate so much profit and employ so many people that all the financial problems would be solved. The government would be able to collect enormous tax revenue from houses that are now appreciating instead of foreclosing, and they would be able to collect the taxes on all the profits that these money-making corporations and small businesses are now generating. But they don't want to do that because they have a socialist mindset, and they're going to kill and run into the ground